This is the last book, and a last book must look two ways at once. Down to the bedrock the whole quest has silently stood on, and up to the horizon past which no telescope will ever reach. The 2 volumes before it built the standard model of cosmology up and then cross-examined it to destruction. Between them they had all but rendered the verdict. What remained was to say what that model rests on and what it can and cannot ever know, and then to bring the long voyage home. I have written it as a juror still, not an advocate, and I have kept the series grading to the final page. Establish science for what is settled and mechanistically understood, contested but serious for what working physicists actively fight over, speculative bridge for a link plausible in principle but not yet earned, and a plainer verdict still for the claims the evidence will simply not bear. A final volume is exactly where the temptation to overreach runs strongest, where the grandeur of an ending most wants to outrun the evidence, and so it is exactly where those labels do their hardest work. Method over allegiance, that is the whole discipline, and I meant to keep faith with it past the last chapter. The ground first, because you earn the right to the vast questions only by securing the stone beneath them. Cosmology is, at its root, particle physics run at the highest energies and the largest scales, and its authority is borrowed from the deepest and best tested physics we possess. So, I begin with the grammar of physical law itself. I start with symmetry, and with Noether's theorem, the astonishing result that every continuous symmetry of the laws implies a conserved quantity, so that the constancy of energy, momentum, and angular momentum are not brute facts, but consequences of the sameness of the laws across time, place, and direction. This is established at the deepest level physics reaches, and I dwell on it because it is the true doorway. Force, in the modern telling, is not the ground, but the consequence. From there I build gauge theory and the standard model, the strange, unreasonable demand that a symmetry holds separately at every point of space-time, and the fields that must exist to save it. That demand, and nothing more mystical, is where the forces come from. Then spontaneous symmetry breaking and the Higgs, the hidden structure of the vacuum that lets a symmetric law wear an asymmetric face and gives the particles their mass, an effective field theory, the quiet miracle that explains why we can know anything at all about one regime of nature without first knowing everything about all of them. That last is the license for the whole enterprise, and I wanted it stated plainly rather than assumed. On that grammar, I run the early universe as a particle physics laboratory, the one place in nature where the highest energies were once simply ordinary. I follow the phase transitions the cooling cosmos passed through and the topological defects those transitions may have left behind, like scars in the fabric, monopoles, strings, domain walls, marked honestly as contested but serious, predicted by good theory and not yet seen. I take up baryogenesis and leptogenesis, the making of matter itself, and the deep puzzle of why there is something rather than its perfect annihilating opposite, and grand unification with its signature prediction of proton decay, a beautiful idea reaching toward energies no collider will ever touch, but the young universe reached for free, and one whose central prediction the experiments have so far declined to confirm. I say so. And at the center of this movement sits the chapter where the series' own long instinct does its most honest work of all, the origin of cosmic magnetic fields. Here the electric and the plasma are not overreach, but exactly the right physics, asked in exactly the right place. A genuine unsolved problem in which magnetohydrodynamics and plasma dynamics are the working tools, and I credit them there without reservation as the instinct's true vindication. Then the ghostliest citizen of the cosmos, the neutrino, a particle so reluctant to interact that trillions stream through you unremarked each second, and yet one whose faint mass and enormous number give it real leverage over the whole. I lay out neutrino physics for cosmologists, follow the cosmic neutrino background older even than the microwave light, and show the remarkable way the sky itself weighs the neutrino and counts its species through NEF and the growth of structure, where these nearly massless ghosts act as a thin, hot component that combs the smallest scales smooth. It is a small movement about a small particle that turns out to matter far more than its shyness suggests. A fitting late reminder that the cosmos is shaped often by the things easiest to overlook. With that, the ground is laid, stone by tested stone, and the standard model of cosmology stands on it. I show that it does. Now the horizon, and here physics becomes carefully philosophy, the same juror's method turned on questions the instruments cannot reach. Cosmology is a strange science. It has one object, unrepeatable, that we cannot experiment upon and can never step outside. So I take up the epistemology of the single case, the underdetermination that haunts any theory of the unobservable, the seductive and treacherous role of naturalness and beauty as guides to truth, and the sharp question of whether an untestable multiverse is science or merely a story physics has learned to tell itself. I am hardest here on the ideas I find most beautiful, because those are the ones most likely to be waved across the border wearing the costume of physics. The anthropic principle I treat not as an answer but as a method, a way of conditioning on our own existence that is legitimate when it constrains and empty when it merely consoles. Then the questions behind the questions, the deep distinction between laws and initial conditions, the past hypothesis, that shadow that has followed the series since the thermodynamics volume, the extraordinary low-entropy beginning that is arguably the single most important unexplained fact in all of physics, the fact from which the arrow of time and the very intelligibility of the past both flow. I weigh the boldest attempts to explain it rather than assume it, Smolin's cosmological natural selection and the genuinely unsettling problem of Boltzmann brains and the measure problem, which any honest reckoning over possibilities is forced to confront. I do not solve it. I claim only to show why it is the right thing to lose sleep over. And then the furthest questions, honesty still allows a physicist to approach: why there is something rather than nothing, the nature of time, and whether its flow is a fact of the world or a feature of the mind that watches it. Whether the universe is at bottom made of information, it from bit, and the simulation argument that idea invites, and, at the far edge, whether we are alone. These are the questions the whole quest has been quietly circling for 20 volumes, and I do not pretend to settle them. What I do instead is mark, as clearly as I can, which are physics, which are philosophy, and which are the permanent mysteries at which both, honestly, fall silent. Here, at last, the two ends of the whole series meet: the mind, which the 10th volume set out after, and the cosmos, which this one closes on, and I found rather than designed that symmetry, the universe becoming in us aware of itself, and asking, through us, what it is. Only then does the 7th movement render the verdict of the whole quest, 20 volumes gathered into a single judgment, plainly and without hedging. It is not a triumph for one side or a rout for the other. It is the judgment a patient juror actually reaches. The series' guiding instinct, the electric and the plasma, is vindicated in one precise place, the origin of cosmic magnetism, corrected in several, and refused by name where it reached past the evidence into a plasma cosmos that would replace the expansion, the dark sector, the whole tested edifice. The honesty that credits the true is the very same honesty that refuses the wished for. A fair trial is precisely one in which the same standard convicts and acquits. The foundation holds. I say it without a hedge. The ground is real, and the horizon is honestly drawn, and between them the whole of cosmology stands in short compass. And then, because a voyage should end as it was lived, rather than as a lecture, I set the argument down, loose the lines from the island one last time, and sail west into the sunset, grateful past the reach of any argument that you came the whole way.